Sunday, December 8th, 2019, MONERO 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. With the UK general election coming up on Thursday, the 12th of December 2019, I want to talk about what, in my opinion, is the real reason why the economy in the UK is doing so badly for the general public at large. Yes, we are told that the UK economy is doing well. Maybe for the very top, the people near the City of London, the people who work in government, be it central government or local government, they're always looking after themselves, so to speak, right? They always give themselves a lot of big pay rises. Yeah, I want to show you how, in my opinion, what we're seeing now, why the whole of the country in general, outside the M25, is feeling the pinch. And it's related to a few factors, and today I'm going to focus on only one of them, which many people don't talk about, and it's the difference between the RPI index and the CPI index. The other factor, which I would add, but I will not focus on, is the crisis of '08, the fact that Labour bailed out the banks, right? The Bank of England has kept rates almost at zero. The same policy, monetary and fiscal policy, has kept going since Labour through to now. We're seeing the debt increase, right? And we're seeing a lot of the money flow into the City of London to keep the banks whole, to keep asset prices high, especially mortgage-backed securities, to keep housing prices high as well. And I have to admit, people like me who have their own houses benefit from it. But the general public in the rest of the country, Northern England or Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, they haven't benefited as much, right? It's more within the M25 around London that people have benefited. But let's go into the CPI and RPI, the difference between both. For that, I'm going to look at an article going back to 2011, and it doesn't matter because it's still the same, and it's from Money Week by Maren Somerset Webb. I've read quite a bit of her stuff. I used to subscribe to Money Week years ago, so let's see what she says. I keep being asked about the difference between the consumer price index and the retail price index. The immediate answer is that they include slightly different things. RPI includes the cost of housing, mortgage interest cost, and council tax, for example, while CPI does not. However, it isn't that simple. If it was, we might have seen RPI fall below CPI as mortgage rates collapsed from 2008. The complicated bit and the more relevant difference between the two comes in the calculations. The RPI is an arithmetic mean, i.e. the prices of everything to be included in it are simply added up and divided by the number of items. The CPI is a geometric mean. It is calculated by multiplying the prices of all the items together and then taking the nth root of them, where n is the number of items involved. I'm going to skip here towards the end of the article because that's the important part here, what she says at the end. So much so that the so-called formula effect tends to produce a difference of approximately 1% in the different indices. If the CPI were calculated as the RPI currently is, it would be about 1% higher than it is, and higher than the RPI. This is why the government likes to link the payments it makes, pensions and so on, to the CPI, and the payments it receives, taxes and so on, to the RPI, right? So there you go. That's what you need to know about this. And I remember back in before the '08 crisis, and I was working in the city, and it was the Labour government that decided to have the Bank of England use RPI instead of CPI for its inflation target. And why did it do that? Well, to make sure that it could borrow money cheaper. The Bank of England wouldn't have to be as tight on money, right? If the CPI looked lower, the financial markets would probably, or not probably, the financial markets would overvalue the bond market. It would drive down interest rates. It would help people get into the housing market, lower mortgage rates, right? This is what it was all about. Let's have a look as well at a retail price index on Wikipedia, what they say here, right? This is the important part here that I was talking about. RPI was first calculated in June 1947, largely replacing the previous interim index of retail prices. It was once the principal official measure of inflation. It has been superseded in that regard by this consumer price index. It goes on to say the RPI is still used by the government as a base for various purposes, such as amounts payable or index-linked securities, including index-linked gilts and social housing rent increases, right? Rent increases. Many employers also use it as a starting point in wage negotiations. Since 2003, it is no longer used by the government for the inflation target for the Bank of England's monetary policy, nor from April 2011 as the basis for indexation of the pensions of former public sector employees. As of 2016, the UK state pension is indexed by the highest of the increase in average earnings, CPI, or 2.5%, the triple lock. So this is one of the reasons why I was looking at this, is because I will be able to get the state pension in 12 years. They've even changed that. It used to be that I would be able to get it at 65, but now it's 67, right? And I'll talk about that as well, how it will affect, in my opinion, people when they retire, maybe in 15 or 12 years like me, or in 20 years, how the difference between the RPI and CPI are really going to affect them. Before that, I want to show you why, in my opinion, there is unhappiness, why the political situation is so unsettled, not only in the UK with Brexit and general elections every 2 years, but also in France and Spain and other places in the world. And my opinion is that through the inflation tax, governments are basically stealing from the general public to keep the financial sector whole, right? Before I go into the numbers, let's look at the difference between nominal and real wages, because that's what we're going to be comparing. So this is from tutor2u.net. Economics says the nominal or money value of wages is expressed at current prices and is not adjusted for the effects of inflation. In contrast, the value of the wages or earnings that someone earns each year are expressed at constant prices and therefore have been adjusted to take into account price changes. So you can see by this little chart here, the blue line is real wages. If you look back at 2008, that blue line has actually gone down. So real wages have gone down since 2008. Nominal wages, of course, have gone up. But that doesn't mean anything. You might say, oh, I was earning £100, now I'm earning 120. But in real terms, you're buying a lot less. That's what the real wages measure, the purchasing power of your earnings, right? Because it accounts for inflation. And the other thing I would say, why people are feeling the pinch is because ever since the Labour government in 2003, and I'm not trying to blame Labour or conservatives, I think they all try to screw the general public. It doesn't matter who gets elected. The difference between the RPI and CPI makes things even worse because the Bank of England is basing everything on a measure that really doesn't measure the true inflation. And even RPI, I would say, is also probably tinkered with, even though it's higher than the CPI. So you get the idea, right? So I want to show you, I found this website, measuringworth.com, and it has data of annual average earnings in Britain from 1209. So I wanted to check 10-year periods going back to 1968 of how earnings, the annual nominal earnings, the ones that are not accounted for inflation, and the average annual real earnings are doing, right, or have done in the past, and how they have done since 08 to 2018. So you can see here in 1968, the nominal wage was $894.79. 1978, it was up to $3,269. That's not accounting for inflation. In real terms, using 2010 prices, wages went from $12,103 in 1968 to $14,627. So even in the 70s, which was a period that wasn't great for the economy, average annual real earnings increased. So let's go to the next 10-year period, 1978 to 1988. And I'll just use the average annual real earnings, right? And you can see in 78, and don't forget, these are in 2010 prices, 14,627, and then in 1988, it had gone up to 18,514. So wages, real wages going up. 1988 to 1998, not a great increase, but it still increased. 18,514 in 1988 to 20,720 in 1998. So now in the period just before our current period, right, from 1998 to 2008. And yes, labor came in 1997, but a lot of the rules had been in effect already. The change in the inflation calculation by the Bank of England only came in 2003. So 1998, 20,720. 2008, 23,597. So since 1968, for 40 years there, average annual real earnings increased in the country. But now, this is the shocker here. This is why things aren't great. And this is why when I was making videos back in 2016, around the time of the referendum and after the referendum, I said that people need to keep it in perspective that Brexit is not what is going to hurt the economy. I was saying that the economy was already hurt because of the bailouts of 08 and the fact that the general public was having to finance the City of London and the banking system. And this is proof of it. You look at 2008, 23,597. That's the average annual real earnings. 2018, look where we are now, 21,471. So I actually calculated that's a drop of 9%. And I also looked at the how the CPI did in that period. The CPI index went up 25.263%. The RPI index went up 34.147%. So roughly a 9% difference. And you can see that annual real earnings actually dropped by 9%. And this is the first 10-year period where the Bank of England is focused on CPI instead of RPI. So there you go. Some people might argue it's all the foreign workers coming here to work. But I would argue that there are a lot of foreigners coming in, like myself, before 2008, right? So why is that happening now? Well, it's because they're ripping you off. They're estimating inflation even more than they previously did. They've always done it, right? But not so blatantly. And even if they went to the RPI, it might improve things, but I'm sure they will find a way to benefit the government and prejudice the taxpayer. Of course, politicians, bankers, they always give themselves much bigger pay rises, right? I think the last increase in MPs' salaries was like 11% a year. To finish off, I wanted to look at the state pension, right? And this is also complicated because there's a basic state pension, but there's also a new state pension, I think, that came into effect in 2016. So this tax year, the new state pension pays £168.60 a week, right? So I looked at the government's website, HMRC, and it says the new state pension increases each year by whichever is the highest. Earnings, the average percentage growth in wages, Great Britain, right? Prices as measured by CPI or 2.5%, right? So if they calculated by RPI, right, this increase could be probably more like 1 or even 1.5%. So I've done a little calculation here. Let's say they underestimate the real inflation, and I think it's a lot higher, and I'm being generous to the government, right? So let's say you're receiving $168.60 a week, right? So you plug that into this impact of inflation calculator. Let's say you're 47, so you add 20 years and you add 1.5%, right, of basically theft by the government, right? And you calculate that, and it shows you what your 168.60 will be really worth in real terms in 20 years' time, 125.18. So that's how they do it. And the other point I would make is, as the baby boomers are retiring until 2030, the population of people retired is going to grow even more. So it's going to impact the economy even more. They're going to take more from people. And this is just the pensioners, right? This is not the worker who's also been kind of shortchanged, as I've shown you, comparing the 10-year periods, right? So let's use 2.5%, because some people would argue that inflation is a lot higher than they tell us, right? So let's recalculate that at 2.5%. Well, there you go. Seem much, right? 2.5%. But look at it. The £168.60 that you would be getting if you're retired now will only be worth $102.89 even after they index it, right? What about for me? Let's do in 12 years, right? Let's say it's just 1%, right? Let's recalculate. Well, there you go. I'm going to be shortchanged as well by almost 20 pounds, even if it's 1%. So what's the solution here? Well, as I've said before, if possible, is to try to get some of your savings into precious metals. Of course, people can't opt out of paying national insurance, but if possible, buy a half sovereign, buy a sovereign if you can. And I'm doing a little bit of a research. It's going to take a little longer. I'm going to look at how much someone back in 1974 who started working then and retired this year, how much he would have from putting half a sovereign, buying half a sovereign every month for 45 years, right? And I'm going to do that calculation to see how well he's done with his gold. So it's going to take a little while. I'm doing that. I'm crunching the numbers, and hopefully I'll give you some proof of how a good idea it is to protect yourself from the inflation tax. So my conclusion is it's the inflation tax that's hurting the general public. And that's why we have politics and the political system in such mayhem. It's because, people are being shortchanged. And people give a lot of reasons for that. Too many immigrants coming here, taking my job, lowering the wages. I would argue that might be a little part of it, but the biggest part is this inflation theft. Inflation is tax. It's a silent tax that people don't know they're paying, right? And the other thing as well is how they have manipulated the inflation statistics. So you should be really on the lookout whenever the statisticians and the governments and politicians say they're going to improve the way they calculate inflation, right? When they say that, you can be sure that, improve for them, but not for you. It's going to be a way to shortchange you. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you share it far and wide as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. And just before I go, this doesn't just apply for the UK. It applies for all the Western countries. All the Western countries, they have been lying about inflation. They've been shortchanging the general public everywhere around the world. So I wish you all a great rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye.